In this video, I'm going to show you how to fix a broken Italian meringue buttercream. Now this bowl is down to room temperature and I'm taking cold butter. So if the butter is not the same temperature as the meringue that you have prepared and have cooled down, it's going to break, which means it'll start to look like cottage cheese and it won't be a nice emulsion. So if you can pick the butter up like this and toss it in like I'm doing, that is not the right temperature of butter, and you need to just wait until the butter comes to room temperature. Everything needs to be around the same. If the meringue mixture is too hot, it will make a soup, and I'll tell you later about how to fix that, but in this case I just wanted the butter to be really cold so that I could show you what to do when it breaks. And you can see the butter isn't even mixing in, it's so cold. And this is just an extreme example just because I wanted to make sure that it was going to break. But if you're mixing your butter in and it's doing this, then you need to stop and just wait and do it later, because anytime you have to fix a buttercream, it's never going to be as good a consistency as it would be if you did it right the first time. You can use it, but it'll be better to use it for fillings and that kind of thing as opposed to on the outside of the cake. So you want to do it right the first time if you can, and see those big chunks of butter that are not mixing in, that is just wrong. So don't do it this way. Alright, now as you're scraping the bowl and trying to get everything in, you really shouldn't have to do this very much if you're actually making a buttercream the right way, because everything should just come together in a nice emulsion and it shouldn't be so bumpy and you shouldn't have to worry about things on the side of the bowl. And you can kind of see that it's starting to look bumpy, which is what I wanted to do in this situation just as a demonstration. It should not look like this. Sometimes in the process of making it, it will look like that, but then it'll smooth out pretty quickly. But it should not look this bumpy. And sometimes it's even worse than this, where there's actual liquid in it if you're really being sloppy. So see how it's kind of bumpy and it's not smooth, and the texture to it. A good meringue buttercream should not have that texture to it. So if that happens and it's not smoothing out just from a small amount of the heat from the whip building up, what you need to do, feel the bowl. If the bowl is really cold, which in this case it was just freezing cold because the butter was so cold when I put it in, all you need to do is take a warm dishcloth and wrap it around the bowl, and that'll warm it up. Sometimes just the warmth of your hands will do it if you just want to rub the bowl like I was doing before. But if it's really this cold, and this was very cold because of the butter, just get a dishcloth with hot water on it and wrap it around the bowl. And as the whip is spinning, the heat from that plus the heat from the whip will start to increase the temperature of the buttercream, and that will help to smooth out the butter and it'll get you a better emulsion. So it'll be smooth. So turn it up as high as it will go, wrap the towel around it, and as soon as the towel gets cold, which should, it depends on how cold the bowl is, but it can take a short time or it can be very quick or take a while. Just wrap it around. Keep moving it so that the hot part of the cloth is on the bowl, and you'll see that the buttercream starts to pull away. See how it's pulling away from the side of the bowl, and it'll start to look a little bit different. The heat from the whip also, as that builds up, that'll help a little bit. But just go ahead and take the cloth and put it back in some more hot water and just keep doing that, and eventually it will smooth out. Now if you do have the opposite problem and you're making buttercream and you put the butter in and all of a sudden it turns to liquid and it looks like buttercream soup, what you should do is take the bowl and put the whole thing in the freezer or the refrigerator for a while. And if you don't have time for that, then you can take an ice bath and do kind of the same thing that I'm doing with the hot cloth, and that will cool off the outside of the bowl and it'll cool off the buttercream that's too hot and make it kind of congeal. So just keep moving this around, and you can see how the buttercream in the middle is starting to come together. Now like I said before, this is never going to be as good as a buttercream that you do right the first time. So if you tried to ice the outside of a cake with this batch, it might not look as good as if you had done it right and it was smooth. This tends to be a little bit thicker when you have to bring it back from a curdled stage. So just be careful with that. You don't want to have to do this every time. This is an emergency. And everyone should know how to save a buttercream, just so that you don't have to throw away all your ingredients, basically. Because when you're doing this at 11 o'clock at night, you don't want to have to go back to the store to get more eggs. That's not fun. So just learn how to do this and you won't have to worry about that. And I was going to edit this down, but I decided just to leave it so you can see how long it takes, because it does take a while. Sometimes it happens pretty quickly. Every now and then I'll get something that's just a little bit off temperature-wise, and if the butter's too cold, it'll break. If the butter's too warm or the syrup is too hot still before you put the butter in, it will turn to soup. So if the temperatures are off, there's a little bit to correct, but if it's just a little bit off, usually the heat of your hands will be enough to warm up the bowl, and that you won't have to go through the process of getting the towel. Alright, now see how it's really starting to come together in the bowl. Now see how thick it is though. A lot of times, usually when you make a meringue buttercream the right way, it shouldn't look that thick. This is going to be usable, but it's not going to be optimal. So like I said, try to do it right the first time. Just make sure everything is at room temperature, and as long as the temperatures are close enough, it'll emulsify and it'll be fine. Now see, it's starting to kind of spread out a little bit, so it's not like a big lump of butter, so that's good. And I also bring the sugar syrup up to 255, like between 250 and 255 when I make the icing, so it does tend to be a little stiffer. Because a lot of recipes I've seen say like 245, 248, but I take it up a little bit higher. And it's much better now. It's smooth. You just don't want that lumpy texture to it, because if you do try to ice a cake with that lumpy texture, it's going to look terrible. It'll taste greasy. It's not going to be good. Alright, so there you go. You can see it's smooth. That wasn't a very good view, but you can see it's smoother. So that's about it. Just make sure everything is the right temperature and you'll be fine.